I am a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun.
He's inside the school shooting at the gun!
Well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
After shooting in the theater, I didn't have a plan of whether to die or not.
Hi everyone, we are glad to see you again. Welcome to the channel if you are new. The past few months have been very birthday heavy in our family, so hopefully now that is all over, we are able to work a little more and get more videos out sooner. This video is yet another member requested case, so thank you to Cass once again for submitting the suggestion. If you would like a chance to chime in on member suggested videos and vote in polls to choose the next case, please consider joining our membership. Any support is highly appreciated. Even just you guys hitting the subscribe and bell notification button mean the world to us. Thank you for the support. Without further ado, let's get right into the case by first talking a bit about the attacker of the tragedy we will be discussing today. Jeffrey James Weise was born in the state of Minnesota on August 8, 1988, to an unmarried couple. That makes his birthday on the 8th day of the 8th month in 1988, which I thought was pretty interesting. His parents, Joanne and Daryl Jr., were both a part of the Ojibwe tribe and lived on the Red Lake Native American Reservation in northern Minnesota. This reservation in particular has several holdings located around the northern part of the state, and they cover a combined area of over 1,200 square miles. The Red Lake Reservation, which is pretty isolated from the rest of the state, is said to be one of the only closed reservations in the United States. This means that the tribe has complete control and authority over the land. They are able to limit who visits or lives in the area, and no one outside of the tribe is allowed to own any property there. It's reported that in 2020, out of the just over 5,000 people living there, almost 40% fell below the poverty line, with also about 40% of people being unemployed. Of course, this may have been different back during the time of the case in 2005, so just keep that in mind. Back to the shooter's life, which did not have the best start. Jeff's parents actually broke up before he was even born, and he originally lived with his mother after his birth. When he was about 3 months old, though, Jeff began living with his father after his mother gave up custody of him. I read in a few sources that for some reason, she was forced to do so by her parents, but it wasn't stated everywhere that this was the case. Either way, Jeff's father lived on the Red Lake Native American Reservation with his own father, Jeff's grandfather, Daryl Sr., at the time, which is where Jeff went to live after his mother gave up custody. In June of 1991, when Jeff was almost 3 years old, his mother Joanne regained full custody of him. Though again, I was unable to figure out why exactly this happened. Either way, she had since relocated from the reservation, where Jeff was still living with his father, to the St. Paul area of Minnesota, and so that is where Jeff was brought to live. His new home was over 4 hours away from where his father lived in Red Lake, though they still saw each other here and there. It's reported that Joanne was an alcoholic and was sadly abusive towards Jeff when he was a child. I read that she locked him out of the house on multiple occasions, leaving him to fend for himself, even at a very young age. In 1992, about a year after Jeff went to live with his mother, she met and began dating a man named Timothy. Unfortunately, the abuse that Jeff suffered only got worse, because it's said that along with Joanne, Timothy also mistreated Jeff by locking him in a closet for hours at a time and forcing him to kneel in the corner of the room for the entire duration. Joanne and Timothy continued their relationship, and even went on to have 2 children of their own, Daphne and Sebastian. There is really no information available that I was able to find regarding Jeff's relationships with his 2 half-siblings, or if they were also mistreated by their parents like he was. Either way, after both of their children's births, Joanne and Timothy finally tied the knot, solidifying their relationship even further. During this time in his life, Jeff was very closed off and reserved from those around him. When members of their family or friends came to visit with his mom and stepdad, Jeff would reportedly lock himself away in his room avoiding interaction with them altogether. Like stated before, while living with his mother, Jeff would occasionally make trips up to the reservation in order to visit his father, who unfortunately was also reported to be an alcoholic. When he wasn't drinking, though, those who knew Daryl Jr. recalled that he was a cool guy. He and his son reportedly got along very well, and despite him also being an alcoholic like Joanne, I didn't read anywhere that Daryl Jr. abused Jeff in any way like she did. I can imagine that this made Jeff wish he was living back with his father, but unfortunately, he wouldn't get the chance to do so again. I saw that Jeff's father actually got married in 1993, but there also isn't really much information about the dynamic between them, how his wife and Jeff interacted, how long the relationship lasted, or if it even ended before Daryl Jr.'s eventual demise. Their relationship apparently didn't affect Jeff much, as I'm sure if it did, there would be more information about it. Overall, Jeff's childhood was treacherous and very unstable, especially at the times that he was with his mom and her husband. It sadly only got worse for Jeff when his father died on July 21st, 1997, when Jeff was only 8 years old. The circumstances surrounding his father's death are kind of extreme, which probably only made the loss worse for Jeff. Daryl Jr. had been barricaded inside of his home and was involved in a days-long standoff with the police in Red Lake at the time. His own father, and Jeff's grandfather, Daryl Sr., was a sergeant in the tribal police force for over 30 years at this point. He attempted to resolve the standoff peacefully, but even he was ultimately unsuccessful. Daryl Jr. ended up fatally shooting himself in the upper body with a shotgun. There isn't much more information on the situation, but this event obviously had an effect on Jeff's life, as he had just lost what seemed to be the parent he got along with the most, despite the fact that he apparently didn't see him very often. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse for young Jeff, about 2 years later, in 1999, when he was just 10 years old, his mother Joanne was involved in a serious and completely life-altering car accident. Joanne's cousin was driving at the time and had been drinking with Joanne earlier in the day. As a result of the accident, Joanne's cousin passed away, and though she survived, Joanne suffered severe brain damage and was admitted into a nursing home, as she was completely unable to function for a while. It was so bad that she apparently had to relearn basic actions, such as how to tie shoes. I'm assuming that since his mother was now in a nursing home following her severe injury, and that she was unable to perform even simple tasks, she was also unable to take care of any of the kids in any way. I'm unsure if Jeff continued living with Joanne's husband, Timothy, after the accident, but if he did, it wasn't for long. I read that in 2000, a year after the accident, Joanne and her husband, Timothy, separated, though their divorce wouldn't be finalized for another 4 years. The custody battles they later went through applied to their 2 shared kids, but Jeff apparently wasn't a part of the discussion in any way. In fact, it's reported that his mother never attempted to get custody of him again, despite her later fighting for custody of her other kids. Jeff was ultimately placed in the care of his paternal grandmother, Shelda, who lived on the Red Lake Reservation. She became his primary caretaker at the time, as Jeff now had no parents to care for him. Along with his grandmother, Shelda, 2 of Jeff's aunts from his father's side, Shauna and Tammy, also reportedly helped take care of him as he grew up. This situation was overall much better for Jeff. Obviously, his mother didn't treat him very well, as he would later claim, which affected him greatly during his childhood. He later confessed to someone about what he went through while living with his mother, saying, "My mom used to abuse me a lot when I was little. She would hit me with anything she could get her hands on. She used to drink excessively too. She would tell me I was a mistake, and she would say so many things that it's hard to deal with them, or think of them without crying." Jeff also later mentioned his mother's accident, when he told someone, "My mom got drunk one night and wrecked her car and had to relearn how to tie her shoes. I was too young to fight back, or too young to stick up for myself without getting struck down when this was happening." Back to Jeff's current living situation, his paternal grandparents had separated at some point and did not live together. He was still able to see his grandfather, Daryl Sr., though, as he also lived nearby on the reservation with his new girlfriend, Michelle. Even though they lived separately, according to some that knew him, Jeff reportedly grew close with both of his grandparents, which gave him a little bit of stability, which he lacked before. The FBI files mention that he may not have been that close with his grandpa, though, because it stated that Jeff apparently told someone he, quote, really did not know his own grandfather. He tried to get to know him, but did not feel comfortable with him. I want to be clear that it isn't stated which grandfather he was referring to, and he could have been talking about the grandfather on his mother's side, who he did also spend some time with. The fact that most in his family at least claimed that he and his paternal grandfather got along well leads me to believe he could have been talking about his other one, though there is no way to be 100% sure. Either way, despite being around non-abusive family members that seemed to really care about him, as Jeff grew older, he began to hate living in the area more and more. It's stated that there was virtually nothing to do there other than hunt and fish, which made it hard for kids Jeff's age to stay busy and out of trouble. As we will later talk about, Jeff openly expressed his disdain with living there, mainly online. Though he was now in a more secure spot in his life, Jeff's struggles clearly continued on. It was around 2001 when Jeff began spending time on the internet. We will talk about his habits and interests regarding this later on, but I just wanted to mention that one of his earliest profiles seems to have been created during this time, when he was in his very early teens. At this point in his life, Jeff was attending Red Lake Middle School, where it's reported that he began being bullied for various reasons. Jeff rarely reacted to the bullying, which we will later talk about as well. There are very mixed opinions on Jeff's demeanor during his time in school. Some of his classmates later claimed that he was a weird and sometimes scary guy. One of them said, "Every time I saw him, he wore a big trench coat. He was scary. He was a big guy. Kids picked on him, but he didn't say much." Despite this description, others later remembered him as a friendly yet reserved person. The general consensus, no matter who was asked, was that Jeff was a pretty quiet guy, and that he was definitely an introvert. Along with verbal teasing that Jeff was subjected to, it's also reported that his bullies got physical with him on more than one occasion. Someone later came forward and claimed that when she was picking up her own kid from the school, she would often see other kids hitting Jeff as he waited outside at the end of the school day. She stated, "I thought it was sad. He would stand there and take it." Along with his many other struggles in school, Jeff was also forced to retake 8th grade because of his failing grades and truancy problems. He was also enrolled in a special education program at the school due to his difficulties, all of which most likely added to the reasons other kids would tease him. According to most sources, though his school life was anything but perfect, Jeff's relationship with his paternal grandfather in particular was going great at this point. They grew really close, and Jeff would visit the home so often that his grandfather and his girlfriend even designated a room for him to have when he wanted to stay the night. This information is why I find it hard to believe that he was talking about Daryl Sr. when he said he didn't know his grandfather very well, and that he didn't feel comfortable around him. Those who knew Jeff and were particularly close to him during this time recall that he was quite an artistic, intelligent, and inquisitive teenager. They also later spoke about how he shared his future aspirations with his family, which reportedly included doing a lot of traveling, eventually adding on to his grandmother's home, producing movies, and even opening up his own video store. By 2003, Jeff's mother had recovered significantly from her previous accident and was now staying in an assisted living home. She was well enough to get a part-time job and even regained her speech, which she had struggled with in the time following her injury. Jeff was then faced with a decision: move back down to live with his mom, or stay on the reservation that he hated more and more as time went on. Ultimately, he made the decision to stay on the reservation with his grandparents rather than moving back down to live with his mother. I think this decision is a clear indication of how much he did not want to go back to living with his mom, because like stated before, he really did not like life on the reservation, especially with all of the bullying that he was put through. I think his seemingly great relationship with his family helped him make his decision easier, but it's still interesting that he decided to stay with them despite his frustration with life there. At some point when visiting his grandparents on his mother's side, Jeff opened up to his grandfather about how school was going. Jeff apparently said, "It's not good. I don't go to the real classes. I go to the alternative school. I'm a year behind. I can't be in regular school because kids are mean to me. They punch me. They trip me." His grandmother, Rita, also said that this was the first time she heard about him having trouble at school. It's also reported on a few sources that she later found out that students were bullying Jeff so badly that they ripped clumps of hair out of his head. She also recalled learning that during at least one incident, multiple students ran up to Jeff and began punching him. In September of 2003, Jeff enrolled at Red Lake Senior High School, and his problems with his classmates unfortunately continued. His personality at this time was described by other students and teachers as particularly withdrawn, similar to how he acted in middle school, though it seems like he had possibly become even more quiet than before. One of his teachers later said, "He was a good listener, just like any ordinary student." Following his attack, she claimed that she saw absolutely no warning signs of what was to come, that Jeff was a completely normal kid in her eyes. Though this teacher described him as a decent and normal student, another one of his teachers later said that Jeff had trouble in class due to his laziness, and that he missed school on a regular basis. Jeff's fellow classmates were aware of his past, that his father had committed suicide, and that his mother had been confined to an assisted living home following her severe car accident. According to reports, Jeff was continuously teased about these two events, but was also regularly bullied about his physical appearance. At this point in his life, Jeff was over 6 feet tall and weighed more than 250 pounds. He was also routinely made fun of over his choice in clothing, as he was usually dressed in an all-black outfit and wore a full-length coat. He also later styled his hair into horns, which I'm sure didn't help. Jeff had also been held back in the previous grade, which gave bullies even more reason to tease him. Even though he was taunted by many students, he was still known by many around him to rarely respond to the negative remarks. One of his classmates recalled that Jeff was quiet, hardly ever saying anything. She also corroborated the fact that Jeff was teased and terrorized by fellow students who thought he was weird. Like those who knew him in the years leading up to his time in high school, several students also later recalled him as non-violent, never taking his supposed anger out on anyone, even when he was relentlessly bullied. One of the school's counselors, Ron Kingbird, would keep up on Jeff's situation in school and would often notify his family when something happened. Jeff's grandmother, Shelda, later said, "Ron would usually call me and let me know Jeffrey was having a hard day." This was beneficial, because according to many sources, Jeff never opened up about his struggles with the bullies at school to his family. They knew something was up, but were just never able to get him to talk about it. It's reported that Jeff continued his habit of missing a lot of days in school, and that his family assumed that was due to the regular teasing he was subjected to. His aunt, Shauna, later said that she would tell Jeff, "If kids are saying things to you, Jeff, just ignore them." She also later stated, "I always tried to tell him, geez, it must take a lot for them to take time out of their day to think of something to say to you. You must really be special." Despite what seemed like constant reminders that he was safe to talk about his issues, Jeff continued to hold them in with those he knew in real life. His family eventually figured out that much of the bullying that Jeff faced surrounded his father's death and his mother's accident, and her subsequent struggle to do even the most basic of tasks. While he was clearly made fun of and bullied in school, and was often described as a loner, Jeff reportedly did have some friends. One of his close friends stated, "He was the only one I talked to about my problems. He was trustworthy, and he was always capable of understanding what I was going through." In a later message that Jeff wrote to someone, he said himself, "I have friends, but I'm basically a loner inside a group of loners. Most of my friends don't know the real me. I've never shared my past with anyone, and I've never talked about it with anyone. I'm excluded from anything and everything they do. I'm never invited. I don't even know why they consider me a friend, or I them. Jeff began developing a kind of fascination with Hitler sometime in the years prior to the shooting he would go on to commit. Jeff's math teacher at the high school, Missy Dodds, later recalled an interaction she had with him while he attended her math class 2 years before the attack. According to her, Jeff had told her that Hitler liked math and then proceeded to lift his sleeve, exposing what appeared to be self-harming marks on his arm. As we will talk about later, there were a few instances in which Jeff harmed himself and even went so far as to attempt to commit suicide. Back to his time in school, though, Jeff had a notebook that he drew in, which one of his friends described as, quote, dark stuff. Some students reported that they saw him drawing swastikas, guns, and other disturbing images such as people being shot in the notebook. Now, let's jump a little into Jeff's internet-related activities. Later investigations revealed that Jeff would spend a significant amount of time on various blog websites, where he would post stories that he had written, along with regular posts, which for him included talking about things such as Nazism and sometimes school shootings. These weren't the only topics of conversation he had, though, as he had many normal chats with others as well. He also made and posted violent animations, which we will get into a little bit later. In December of 2003, Jeff made a post to one of these sites, introducing himself to the community, saying, "I came across this place on the EasyBoard search thing, and this seems like my kind of place, so where do I start? My name is Jeff Weise. Kind of a plain and boring name, I think. I hate my first name, so most of my friends call me by my last. And I would prefer that it would be that way around here, if that's not too much to ask. I'm a writer, horror only, though might experiment with non-horror stories someday. And I'm 15. That's about it. Just wanted to make myself known to everybody. P.S. I'm a guy, if most haven't figured or wanted to know. LOL." Many people welcomed Jeff to the site, which he seemed to appreciate. After all, being met with immediate kindness was probably something that Jeff was not very used to in his daily life. The people he met online also encouraged him to post his creative writings, something that he did end up going through with. Jeff also frequented other sites, such as AboveTopSecret.com, which is a site dedicated to discussions surrounding conspiracy theories, paranormal topics, as well as things such as UFOs. Another site he reportedly visited regularly was Nazi.org, which I'm sure doesn't need a description. Among many others, he also visited sites such as MSN.com, Yahoo.com, LiveJournal.com, Newgrounds.com, and homepageofthedead.com. Later on, multiple online comments made by Jeff on various sites were discovered. In these, he expressed his dissatisfaction with living in Red Lake. He described the reservation as, quote, a place where people choose alcohol over friendship, where women neglect their own flesh and blood for relationships with men, where I cannot escape the grave I am continually digging for myself. Another similar post of his reads, "So fucking naive, man, so fucking naive. Always expecting change when I know nothing ever changes. I've seen mothers choose their man over their own flesh and blood. I've seen others choose alcohol over friendship. I sacrifice no more for others. Part of me has fucking died and I hate this shit. I'm living every man's nightmare, and that single fact alone is kicking my ass. I really must be fucking worthless. This place never changes. It never will. Fuck it all." In these comments, he also conveyed his feelings about how his life was beyond his control. According to some of his friends at the time, they believed Jeff was suicidal after some of the things he would say around them. On one occasion, Jeff had apparently said, "That would be cool if I shot up the school." His friends did not take him seriously at all, and very unfortunately swept this warning under the rug. Later on, after the shooting at Red Lake, a student said that nobody should be surprised that Jeff was the suspect in the crime, because, quote, he fits the profile of a Columbine shooter man. He then went on to describe how Jeff would wear combat boots, similar to both suspects of the Columbine shootings. We will come back to how this case related to Columbine in a little bit. On Jeff's MSN profile, he described himself as, 16 years of accumulated rage, suppressed by nothing more than brief glimpses of hope, which have all but faded to black. I can feel the urges within slipping through the cracks, the leash I can no longer hold. In May of 2004, his mental health had deteriorated to a dangerous level. He was reportedly scraping the metal end of a pencil into his arms, which immediately alarmed his family. His aunt Shauna later said, "I just hugged him and said, 'Jeffrey, don't hurt yourself.'" In response to this, it's reported that Jeff claimed he wasn't intending to hurt himself, just that he needed to release his inner pain. His depression got worse and eventually drove him to attempt suicide by cutting his wrists. He apparently changed his mind after already wounding himself and later turned to the site, above top secret, where he then posted his thoughts on the situation. His post read, "I had went through a lot of things in my life that had driven me to a darker path than most choose to take. I split the flesh on my wrist with a box opener, painting the floor of my bedroom with blood I shouldn't have spilt. After sitting there for what seemed like hours, which apparently was only minutes, I had the revelation that this was not the path. It was my decision to seek medical treatment, as on the other hand, I could have chose to sit there until enough blood drained from my downward lacerations on my wrists to die." A month later, in June of 2004, Jeff attempted to end his life for a second time. This time, his aunts arranged for him to be hospitalized in hopes of getting him the help that he needed. It's reported that during this time, he was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant, and he was also put into counseling as part of his treatment. As far as I could find, he was taking 40 milligrams of Prozac a day at this point. Jeff's family claimed that his doctor had increased his Prozac dosage to 60 milligrams a day, sometime in 2005, the year following his suicide attempt. It's reported that multiple members of his family were worried about the dosage increase. Jeff's aunt later stated, "They kept upping the dose for him, and by the end, he was taking 3 of the 20 milligram pills a day. I can't help but think it was too much, that it must have set him off." According to sources, months before the shooting took place, the FDA issued a warning about the use of Prozac for teenagers and children, because apparently, it caused increased thoughts and acts of suicide and violence. As stated before, one of the websites that Jeff would frequent was Nazi.org, specifically on an internet forum of the Libertarian National Socialist Green Party, or the LNSGP. On the site, he went by the username Todesengel, which reportedly means Angel of Death in German. Later, he went by Native Nazi. After taking a look through his posts, it was made clear that Jeff approved of Adolf Hitler's ideology. His posts also revealed that he was interested in sharing the ideas with, and hopefully swaying other Native Americans to follow the very merits of those ideas. On March 19th, 2004, he made what seems to be his first post under the title, "Native American Nationalists." It reads, "Hello all, my name is Jeff Weise, a Native American from the Red Lake Indian Reservation in Minnesota. I'm interested in joining the group, as I support your ideals, and even though I'm young, I still want to join. What is the age requirement, if any?" He was quickly welcomed here as well, and part of his second message read, "What brings me to the forum? Well, I stumbled across the site in my study of the Third Reich, as well as Nazism, among other things. I guess I've always carried a natural admiration for Hitler and his ideals, and his courage to take on larger nations. I also have a natural dislike for communism. When I was growing up, I was taught, like others, that Nazis are evil, and that Hitler was a very evil man, etc. Of course, not for a second did I believe this. Upon reading up on his actions, the ideals and issues the German Third Reich addressed, I began to see how much of a lie had been painted about them. They truly were doing it for the better." Many sources also report that Jeff at one point wrote about the possibility that he was a German soldier fighting in World War II in a past life of his. On April 19th, Jeff shared on the site that he was apparently being blamed for a shooting threat at his school. He posted, "I am being blamed for a threat on the school I attend, because someone said they were going to shoot up the school on April 20th, Hitler's birthday. And just because I claim being a National Socialist, guess whom they've pinned? A month later, on May 13th, 2004, Jeff made another post regarding this incident, where he said, "They pegged me as a possible school shooter earlier this year. Or wait, that was last month." Apparently, someone was supposed to shoot up the school on April 20th, and there was a lot of buzz around me, and for good reasons, I guess. I wear combat boots, with my pant legs tucked into them, wear a trench coat, and at the last basketball game, my friend Mac, who happens to wear a black trench coat like mine, did a Sieg Heil during the national anthem for shock value. So they had us pegged as Trenchcoat Mafia. My friend Rose even said that I fit the profile of a school shooter that she saw on 60 Minutes. They also pinned it on me because April 20th happens to be Adolf Hitler's birthday, and I seem to be the only one who promotes nationalist socialist beliefs. Not the stereotypical white power BS you hear racists shouting either, so it's not hard to label a school shooter. I happen to be not so popular, gothic, in the sense that I wear nothing but black, spike my hair in devil horns, and listen to music like Cradle of Filth and Korn, and happen to be an emotionally disturbed person, if you could call me that. So it's really no problem slapping a label on someone because they fit the stereotype. And no, I wasn't the one who did the threat. On game day, April 20th, the feds were all around the place, watching. Cop cars on nearly every corner around the school, and a few large unmarked black vans sitting around. I bet they were on standby. So, they were prepared for something to happen. P.S. I'm not a white supremacist. Can't even spell it. I'm a Native American, Ojibwe, living on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in Minnesota. And let's not have this turn into a hardcore political discussion about my political ideals. Okay? Moving on from the shooting threat, one of Jeff's later posts on the site said, "You encounter a lot of hostility when you claim to be a National Socialist, but because of my size and appearance, people don't give me as much trouble as they would if I looked weak. I already had a fist fight with a communist not too long ago over me being what I am. I also won, but it was worth it. I don't try to hide what I am from anyone. If they're going to start something over it, then fine. I'm not backing down, nor am I hiding. I try not to be aggressive in most situations. I'll use force if I have to, but I'm not about to go out and pick a fight. I'm mostly defensive. I'll defend myself if someone tries something, but other than that, I'm a peaceful person." He continued on saying, "But the school threat passed, and I was cleared as a suspect. I'm glad for that. I don't much care for jail. I've never been there, and I don't plan on it." Back to what was going on in his current life leading up to his planned attack. Jeff was not attending school for at least 5 weeks prior to the shooting. There is a ton of varying information as to why that was, though. Some articles state that Jeff was actually suspended for the threat to shoot up the school on April 20th, among other reasons. Some of them include teachers recommending a homeschool approach for him, a conflict with school faculty, unspecified medical reasons, behavioral issues, and so on. As mentioned before, later found on his computer during the investigation were violent and graphic flash animations that Jeff had created. After he made them, he would then upload the animations online under the alias Regret. One of his animations was titled Target Practice and depicted someone shooting 3 people, blowing up a police car with a grenade, and then shooting a KKK member. The character then raised a handgun to his head and shot himself. This animation was an eerie but partial glimpse into Jeff's future. In another, a man walks up to a creepy clown before the clown eats him. There is truly too much to include when it comes to Jeff's online presence, but I hope that what I did share gives you a good idea as to what he was getting up to on the various sites and forums that he frequented. Jeff was also interested in school shootings. According to multiple articles, Jeff had a particular fascination with the Columbine school shooting, which took place in Colorado almost 6 years prior. On March 4th, 2005, 17 days before the shooting, Jeff apparently brought the movie Elephant over to a friend's house so that they could watch it together. This movie's premise is said to be heavily based on the 1999 Columbine school massacre and is unsurprisingly about a school shooting. According to this friend Sky, when they played the movie, Jeff skipped over certain parts to the scenes where the attackers were planning and executing the massacre. Now let's get into the day that changed the lives of many on the Red Lake Native American Reservation. I did my best to compile all of the information about the specific events of that day, including Jeff's movements, but there were some conflicting reports. From here on out, I will be referring to Jeff as his last name, Weise. On the afternoon of Monday, March 21, 2005, Weise's grandma, Shelda, returned home for lunch and saw her now 16-year-old grandson in the living room around noon. Shortly after this, Weise told one of his aunts that he was leaving the house and was going to go take a walk. The last time he was seen by her was reported to have been between 12:30 and 1:30 p.m. Weise then made the relatively short journey over to his grandfather's home, walking through the woods to get there. Weise's cousin had been at the house earlier that day and later recalled seeing Daryl Sr. eating a sandwich on the couch as he was watching TV while she was there. At some point, she left the home, not knowing that this would be the last time that she ever saw Daryl. It isn't reported what Weise's exact actions were when he arrived at his grandfather's house, but it's stated that at some point, most likely shortly after getting there, he retrieved a Ruger Mark II 22 caliber pistol from his bedroom. It isn't absolutely clear where it originally came from or who owned it, but according to a few sources, Weise's friends later claimed that the pistol may have been in his possession for as long as a year at the time of the killings. After grabbing the gun, Weise made his way throughout the house to his grandfather's bedroom, where he was sound asleep at the time. The armed Weise approached his bedside, took aim, and shot his grandfather a total of 12 times, ending his life in the process. 2 of the shots were to the head, while the remaining 10 were to his torso. Weise departed from the room and made his way through the home again, encountering and shooting his grandfather's girlfriend, Michelle, in the head as she carried laundry up the stairs. I'm unsure if Michelle heard the shots that ended Daryl's life, but judging by the fact that she was actively doing household chores, she seemed unaware of the danger she was in. Weise then retrieved 2 of his grandpa's service weapons, a 40 caliber Glock 22 handgun and a 12-gauge Remington 870 pump-action shotgun. He then equipped himself with his grandfather's duty gun belt, his police radio, and his bulletproof vest. Originally, Weise shot Michelle with the 22 caliber pistol, but according to the FBI files, he went back to where she was laying and finished her off with a final shot from his grandfather's 40 caliber Glock. After executing Michelle, Weise scoured the home for more weapons. He ended up finding and attempting to load an M4 rifle, as he was planning to take it with him when he left the home to enact the second part of his plan. However, because the gun was so dirty, it's reported that he had issues trying to load it, as it kept jamming up. He then decided just to leave the rifle behind altogether. If he had brought it, the massacre he was about to commit could have been much worse. After leaving the house and getting into his grandpa's police vehicle, Weise drove to the school he previously attended, Red Lake High School. He arrived on campus about 5 minutes later, between 2:45 and 2:50 p.m. There, he parked the vehicle up against the front doors to the school and got out, grabbed his weapons, and reportedly fired 2 shotgun rounds into the air before approaching the front entrance. On the diagrams of the crime scene, there was no mention of any casings found outside, but many reports state that he did shoot off some rounds, so just keep that in mind. According to an article on CBSNews.com, one of the security guards sitting just inside the building, a woman named Leanne Grant, was startled when the 2 blasts went off outside. She then observed Weise, who she knew and recognized, walking up and trying to enter the building. She later said, "He looked right at me. I made eye contact with him." 3 of the 4 front doors were locked, and after trying a few of them, Weise eventually found the open one. Weise made his way inside and was immediately met with the two completely unarmed security guards, who were manning a metal detector at the entrance, both sitting on either side of it. Leanne hurriedly warned the other guard, a man named Derek Brunn, that they needed to run. She later recalled, "He walked in and fired another shot, and I was telling Derek, 'Come on, let's go. Let's go. Derek, run. We need to save these kids. We need to do something.' And I radioed in, 'There's a guy coming in the school and he's shooting, and he has a gun.'" She continued on, saying, "Derek just sat there at his desk. He just kept staring at Jeff. I kept hollering for him to come with me. He wouldn't come. He just stayed there." According to Leanne, the commotion drew students to the area, most likely because they thought a fight was taking place. Leanne also remembered this moment, later saying, "I start yelling at them, 'Run! There's a guy with a gun here. Just run!' And then I took off to try to protect them." Instead of making a run for it with Leanne, Derek rose from his desk and without hesitation, made moves to confront Weise. In response to this, Weise aimed his shotgun and opened fire once again, striking 28-year-old Derek in the chest as he approached him. Sources claim that Derek then turned around and was subsequently shot once again, this time in the back. Derek had unsuccessfully attempted to subdue the gunman, despite being completely unarmed himself. The shots to Derek's upper body proved to be fatal, and his life was very sadly taken. Leanne later spoke about Derek and his bravery, saying, "I know he bought me time by confronting Jeff. For me to even get that much farther away with the students, Derek's my hero. He didn't even look scared. He didn't look worried. He knew what he was going to do." Because of Derek's actions, Leanne was able to make a run for it and ended up surviving the attack, sustaining no injuries in the process. The small amount of time that Derek provided for her also allowed her to notify others in the school of the imminent danger, effectively saving countless lives. It was around this time that the local tribal police force began receiving reports of the shooting as well, to which they immediately responded. Teachers around the school heard the shots and the screams of those who had just witnessed the beginning of the attack in the school's lobby. Some were notified by fleeing people about the danger, giving them a head start on protecting themselves. The startled and soon panicked teachers swiftly reacted by locking their classroom doors in an attempt to stop the shooter from accessing their rooms. Weise continued through the school, where he would later end up running into a few people, seemingly unaware of the situation. According to a few different sources, Weise went around and attempted to enter at least 6 classrooms, but they were all already locked. It's important to note that several people around the school assumed the gunshots were just rowdy students causing commotion by intentionally hitting lockers or dropping books, which meant that some people were thoroughly unprepared for the danger that was now roaming freely around the school's hallways. It's reported on the FBI files that Jeff may have warned at least one person to get out of the school sometime during his rampage. Official FBI files state that it was around this time that we saw a teacher named Neva Rogers, who was out in the hallway, in the process of pushing a cart to another classroom. She was at the opposite end of the hall, walking with a group of students at the time, all of them conversing together. Upon noticing them, Weise raised his shotgun at the group and fired 2 rounds, which missed and hit the pair of double doors on the east side of the building past where the group was. Quickly realizing the danger they were in, Neva and the students immediately fled from the area. Missy Dodds, Weise's previous math teacher, was in the middle of teaching in a nearby classroom when someone began pounding on the door. Upon opening it, a student ran in and threw her stuff on the floor, claiming that someone had just shot a teacher, Mrs. Rogers, out in the hallway. After her, a few more people banged on the door, including someone also notifying them of the shooting. Along with them, Neva also sought refuge in this room. Neva quickly locked the door behind her and shut the lights off after arriving. It would be very soon after this that Weise would arrive, ultimately wreaking havoc on the occupants of this room. A girl who thankfully survived, Leah, later said about Neva entering, "Had she not came into our room, he probably wouldn't have came in too." A 15-year-old boy in the class named Chase Lucier was already alert, as he had heard the shots as Weise approached, and after Neva ran into the room, he acted quickly. Chase reportedly pushed students towards the back of the class, away from the door, including his friend Ashley. He told her to get down before crouching in front of her. Unfortunately, Weise was not done quite yet. He followed in Neva's path, making his way down the hallway, and arriving at the door of the math classroom at about 2:51 p.m. A witness inside the room claimed to have heard the doorknob jiggle briefly, before silence fell once again. According to the FBI files, when Weise walked up to the door, he hesitated a bit. A student inside of the room actually later recalled looking through the large window next to the door, seeing Weise's face change as he realized he could simply shoot the glass panel in order to gain entry, recalling it as his aha moment. Missy Dodds also spoke about this, saying, "I didn't know what was going on, but I thought we would be safe. Then when I looked up and saw his face in the glass, I thought, oh my God, we are in so much trouble." After making this realization, Weise wasted no time and shot out the window, squeezing through the now gaping opening. He walked into the dark space and looked around at all of the terrified students and teachers huddled inside. Leah later recalled him entering, saying, "All you hear is a big old pop, and then all I remember seeing is like some combat boots step through that side window next to the door. Even though the door was locked, he just shot out the window next to it, and it's like not that wide, so he had to come in sideways." A football player, Jeff May, who was among the students sheltering inside, immediately recognized Weise when he made entry. This student has the same first name as Weise, so I will be referring to him later by his full name, to hopefully keep it clear. According to reports, Neva Rogers began to pray out loud as she was backing away from Weise and was heard by those in the room with her, saying, "God be with us, God help us." According to multiple articles, a 14-year-old student in the room later stated that after Neva Rogers was heard praying, Weise approached her with the shotgun and raised it at her, pulling the trigger, only to hear a click, because the weapon was empty. The student recalled that Weise then discarded the shotgun on the floor and pulled out his .40 caliber Glock and shot Neva multiple times, killing her. It's important to note that there are varying reports which stated that Weise killed Neva immediately, leaving out the part that his gun was empty to start. Either way, he then turned to all of the kids huddled in the corner of the room and asked them, "Do you guys believe in God?" Apparently, only one student responded to this question with a no. Others claim Weise said something along the lines of, "If any of you believe in God, now would be a good time to call in a favor," or, "You better ask him for help now." Due to his supposed fascination with the Columbine shooting, many believe that this quote was a direct reference to when the victims of that massacre were asked if they believed in God by the attackers. Ashley, the young girl huddled behind her friend Chase, peeked over him and met eyes with Weise. It was then that he drew the Glock and aimed it at her, but Ashley ducked before hearing the following shots go off. Chase, who was still shielding her, was unfortunately fatally struck at this time. Weise continued to discharge rounds into the classroom, hitting multiple victims in the process, reportedly intentionally missing the student that answered his question about God with a no. Thanks to Chase's bravery, Ashley was left unharmed. She later recalled that Chase saved her life that day, and that if he wasn't crouched in front of her, she would have been the one to receive the fatal wound. Leah was also wounded at this time, when she was shot in the leg during the burst of fire. Around the school, students and teachers alike heard the burst of shots and were doing anything they could to protect themselves, which included staying quiet and still in their locations. Some were still unaware of the danger because, like I stated before, some people thought the noise was just kids roughhousing in the hallways. One student in particular said that, like many others, he thought the original gunshots were somebody hitting a locker until he smelled the gunpowder. He also said that the reality of the situation became clear when he heard the screams of his fellow schoolmates being cut short by gunfire in Mrs. Dodd's classroom. Other nearby students recalled hearing someone scream, "No, Jeff! Quit! Quit! What are you doing?" Back in the math class that Weise was targeting, the student Jeff May, who was still hiding in cover, realized that time was of the essence, and Weise desperately needed to be stopped. According to reports, Jeff May was both taller and heavier than Weise, which gave him the confidence that he would be able to do something to stop the attack. He reportedly thought to himself, "If I can slow him down, maybe I can save some lives." Considering the fact that students were in the middle of their schoolwork when Weise began his attack, Jeff May was still grasping a pencil when he came up with the plan to stop Weise. The last living teacher in the room, Missy Dodds, recalled the moment that Jeff May made the decision to put his life on the line to save lives. She remembered as Weise lifted the gun toward her and pulled the trigger, but instead of a loud bang going off, all she heard was a click. As Weise either went to reload or grab his shotgun to try and shoot her again, Jeff May heroically decided to charge at Weise as he felt the time was right. He managed to gain some distance quickly and attempted to tackle Weise to the ground, simultaneously stabbing him in the side with his pencil. According to some reports, this gave some people in the room enough time to escape the scene to safety. Others, mainly those who were injured, were still trapped in the room, unable to make any quick movements. Many articles claim that the pencil unfortunately did absolutely nothing to Weise, as he was still wearing his grandfather's bulletproof vest. As the two boys struggled, Weise was able to regain control of his handgun and pull the trigger. Jeff May was shot in the face, with the bullet shattering his jaw and lodging itself in his neck. Unsurprisingly, he immediately fell to the floor. Miraculously, he ended up surviving his wounds, but he was obviously left severely injured. Leah later stated that Jeff May began having a seizure at this time, and she remembers his body shaking uncontrollably. Before being shot himself, Jeff May had witnessed several of his friends die that day. One in particular was a 14-year-old girl named Alicia White, whom he reportedly had a major crush on. I even read on a few sources that he was planning to marry her someday, but it's reported that he hadn't gained the courage to ask her out yet. He also saw his good friend Dwayne Lewis fall to the ground, now lying unresponsive. The other students who ended up losing their lives that tragic day were Thurleen Stillday, Chanel Rosebear, and Chase Lucier. In total, 6 people in this room were fatally wounded by Weise, including the teacher, Neva, and 5 students. With his shotgun still laying on the floor, Weise reportedly left the room and roamed around the halls for a little bit, shooting at random people he came into contact with, all of whom survived the attack. One was a student named Ryan, who was actually shot in the chest during this time. Witnesses report seeing Weise smile and wave as he continued to shoot throughout the school. Eventually, Weise walked into an area nearby to the first class he targeted, and that was when he reportedly saw a few students staring at him through a biology classroom window. According to reports, they were curious as to what the banging sounds were, wondering what was going on outside. Upon noticing the unsuspecting teenagers, Weise approached the room and peeked inside to see the people hiding within. One of the students was a boy named Cody Thunder, who later claimed he had reached out to Weise before the attack, since he knew he didn't have many friends. He later said, "No one talked to him. I just thought it would be nice to go talk to him. So, I did." Anyway, Weise, still standing outside of the closed door, then apparently scowled at Cody and aimed his Glock right at him, before firing through the window, hitting Cody in the hip in the process. Cody later recalled the moments before being shot, saying, "I was in shock, and I didn't think that I was like, what is he doing? And then he ended up shooting. I thought he was messing around. I thought it was a paintball gun or something. He had a mean face." Another student in this classroom, Carter, later stated that he also didn't believe the gun that Weise had was real. That was, until he shot Cody. He spoke of the time before the shots went off, though, saying, "At that point, I didn't realize Jeff had a real gun. I thought he was messing around with a BB gun. I remember thinking, boy, is he going to be in trouble." Many students in other parts of the school reported their perspectives of the shooting. One reported that they looked into the hallway following the gunshots, wondering what was going on, and observed Weise aiming into the classroom and firing. After this round of shots, the students and teacher inside of the room quickly fled to a connected office, where the teacher then slammed the door and held it shut, demanding that the kids get out of there, saying, "Run! He's coming! Just fucking run!" The office was connected to 2 classrooms, and so the fleeing victims ran into the next room. Weise entered the initial classroom that the frantic people had just fled from and continued shooting as he walked around. From crime scene photos, it looks like Weise then walked over to the office door and shot at the handle in an attempt to break the lock to get it open, but that reportedly never happened. Following this, because the Glock was now out of ammo, Weise gave up and set it down on one of the desks behind him, where he would ultimately leave it before departing from the room. Having left his shotgun in the first classroom and his Glock in the second, Weise then went back out into the hallway without either of them. Just a few minutes after being alerted of the shooting, armed officers burst into the school, determined to stop the threat. Unlike the Columbine shooting, where police waited outside of the school for over 40 minutes during the attack, the Red Lake tribal police officers rushed straight in. Despite knowing they were supposed to wait for SWAT to arrive before entering the school, they did it anyway. This quick response likely saved countless lives, which they were later praised for. According to the FBI files, one of the officers immediately ran into the office area and attempted to locate the shooter on the school's security cameras. After being unable to see him or his location, the officers decided to just scour the halls in order to find him. While the officers were making their way through the school, they heard multiple gunshots ring out. These were most likely the shots that Weise fired through the window of the second classroom. Not too long after, the officers reached the end of the hallway and peeked around the corner. It was right then that Weise was walking down the hallway back towards the way he came from before and came into view of the police. This was the moment that he was unexpectedly met with the responding officers. Brief gunfire between Weise and the officers was exchanged, and most reports state that Weise was wounded at least twice during this firefight. It seems as though Weise used his .22 caliber pistol for the return fire, as it was later documented that 2 shell casings, along with the gun itself, were later found somewhere in this hallway. After shooting back at the officers, the now injured Weise quickly returned to the first classroom, where he had killed 6 people earlier. It's reported that after he ran back into the room, the police demanded that he come out with his hands raised. Many sources state that Weise then yelled a warning out to the officers that he had hostages in the room with him. Weise was said to have been in the room for about 5 minutes, but eventually he seemingly gave up. He picked his grandfather's shotgun up off the floor, placed the barrel under his chin, and pulled the trigger, ending his life in an instant. A student in the room recalled this moment saying, "He fell backwards a little bit, then he kind of shut his eyes for a little bit, and put the gun under his chin, and fired." The officers were then alerted by those still alive in the room that the shooter had just ended his own life, and so they immediately made entry in order to help those that were injured out of the building. Though Weise was already deceased, it's reported that police cuffed him anyway. Since the officers had rushed to the scene so fast, they were all still in civilian clothes, which initially scared the victims, because they immediately thought they were additional attackers. Thankfully, after Weise was incapacitated, there was no other danger for the victims to face. The entire shooting, beginning with Weise's grandfather, Darrell Sr., and ending at the school, lasted anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. During that short time, it's reported that over 50 bullets were expended, and 9 innocent people were killed. The spree also left at least 5, possibly more, injured, and countless others traumatized for life. Some of those injured that day suffered horrific wounds. Stephen Kobane was shot in the left side of his forehead and had to be airlifted to a hospital in North Dakota. He slipped into a coma, but ended up surviving. He lost his left eye in the attack and also suffered severe brain damage as a result of his injury. Lance Crow was shot in the hand as he raised it to shield his face. The bullet passed through his hand, clipped his chin, and ricocheted down into his chest. If he hadn't put his hand up, it's possible he would have also been killed. Ryan Oganash sustained a gunshot wound to the chest during the attack. Cody Thunder was struck in the hip by Weise's gunfire. And of course, Jeff May was shot directly in the face and was said to have been paralyzed on his left side following the attack. Investigators believe that the victims themselves were random and had not been particularly targeted. Outside of the school, people had been gathered for a while as the shooting took place, including parents and family members that knew something was going on. Many sat in wait, wondering if they would ever see their loved ones again. One of Weise's aunts actually ended up coming to the school when she heard that something was happening, and she noticed that her dad, Daryl Sr.'s police vehicle, was outside. This wasn't a surprise to her, because she claimed that he was always one of the first officers to show up to an incident. But as time went on, and by the time the shooting was finally over, she began to wonder where her father was. She was completely unaware that he had never even had the chance to respond to the urgent call, that he was still at his home, and was actually the first victim of the attack on the reservation that day. After the incident occurred, police immediately began piecing together the timeline of events. CCTV footage from the school was recovered, but unfortunately, the footage showing the exterior of the school was wiped because no one turned the recorder off following the event. In turn, video kept getting captured, so the events of the shooting were taped over. Thankfully, this wasn't the case for the interior footage, which I suppose is the more crucial of the two. During the investigation, authorities obviously dug through anything of Weise's that would give them any insight into what made him commit the deadly attack. After the police's initial sweep of Weise's bedroom, his family found and turned in a map they found crumpled up in the corner of his room. The map was one that could be found in the high school student handbook and was a diagram of the school's layout. On it were several markings that Weise had written in various areas, including small notes such as sniping spots, kill zone, and POT, which is theorized to mean path of travel. This suggested that Weise was planning a far more lethal attack, with some sources stating that his goal was to kill more people than the perpetrators of the Columbine massacre did, which was 13. It's also stated that Weise apparently had plans to commit the massacre during a busy time in the school's gym, such as prom, which would maximize his chance of obtaining his goal. As we will soon talk about, he also reportedly wanted to include other attackers, stationing them at key areas of the school to pick off survivors as they fled from the gym. It's unclear why these potential plans were ultimately abandoned. In his journal, police found an entry which said, in part, "I still feel a dampness on my conscience. It's already all planned out in my head. I've played the scenes over and over, an orchestra of thundering steel and desperate screams." Unfortunately, some other journal entries of his are redacted in the files. Following the killings, authorities launched a full investigation into Weise's life outside of school. They began to comb through his online activities as part of their investigation, which ultimately told them a lot about what he was thinking in the time leading up to the shooting. On Weise's computer, investigators found multiple chat rooms between him and other people, some of which included very concerning conversations about guns, pipe bombs, and shooting up a school. Apparently in these chats, Weise would often talk about plans to commit an attack, killing police, and also trapping the front entrance to the doors of the school in order to stop or slow law enforcement. Some chats were apparently untraceable, and authorities were never able to confirm exactly who some of these people that Weise was speaking with were. However, investigators were able to track down a few people who spoke with Weise about the disturbing topics. One person in particular, who I was unable to find the name of, was confirmed to have been chatting with Weise about the construction of an improvised explosive device. Weise never did use any explosives in the attack, but it is very unsettling that he was speaking to numerous people about them. His planning seemed to be all over the place, and I'm sure he spoke about doing a lot of stuff he never ended up getting to. Explosives could have caused this case to be much worse, so I am glad he never got around to making or using them. It's reported that approximately 3,200 chat logs were copied off of Weise's computer for further analysis. Initial investigations pointed towards multiple other teenagers with possible involvement. According to the FBI files, at least one other person was arrested in connection to the shooting. His name was Louis Jourdain, and he was either 16 or 17 years old at the time of the shooting. He also lived on the reservation, was actually the son of Red Lake Tribal Chairman Buck Jourdain, and is also reported on many sources to be Weise's cousin. Ultimately, Jourdain was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, following the discovery of concerning messages sent between him and Weise online. This charge was eventually dropped, but he did end up pleading guilty to transmitting threatening messages through the internet. His sentence was sealed, so it's not known how many years he was actually made to serve. Another concerning rumor about Jourdain that supported the claims that he may have been involved came out later. According to Indians.com, Jourdain was also at the school during the shooting, but was in the library at the time. As far as the article says, upon hearing the shots ring off, he reportedly immediately told the students around him that Weise was involved. The site also states that Jourdain may have actually confronted Weise out in the hallway, but I didn't see that reported anywhere else. His insider knowledge of who was shooting inside the school further solidified that he had prior knowledge that the massacre would take place. What isn't known, though, is why, after all of the supposed planning with Jourdain, Weise decided to act alone. Back to the time after the shooting, the posts that Weise made on Nazi-focused forums were also uncovered during the investigation. I've already shared many posts that he made, but I decided to include some other ones here as well. One post read, quote, "As a result of cultural dominance and interracial mixing, there are barely any full-blooded natives left. It's hard, though. Being a Native American National Socialist, people are so misinformed, ignorant, and closed-minded it makes your life a living hell." It's also said that he would routinely criticize interracial couples on the reservation on these forums. Some sources state that he had strong opinions about racial purity, which I think is apparent from the quote I just shared. Weise also expressed strong opinions on Native American teenagers that listen to rap music. One post said, quote, "We have kids my age killing each other over things as simple as a fight, and it's because of the rap influence." This is a very ironic post considering what he went on to do. A drawing that Weise created was also later discovered. Part of the moderately redacted FBI files reads, "The character, which resembled Weise, depicted him holding a short-barreled shotgun, an AR-15 type rifle, and wearing a law enforcement duty belt. All equipment that Weise had taken from his grandfather, Sergeant Darrell Lucier, and used during the actual shooting, with the exception of the rifle, actually an M4 rifle, which had jammed while Weise was loading it and had been abandoned by Weise before going to Red Lake High School." Further review of the drawing reveals that the background accurately depicts the entrance to the Red Lake High School, including the front doors, metal detectors, the desk used by the high school security guards, and even depicted. Despite all of this evidence later found, Weise's family claimed they were completely unaware of the danger he posed. According to one member, the entire family was utterly shocked by his actions on March 21, 2005. Following the attack, and after learning that her nephew was actually the one to cause all of the pain and destruction, Weise's Aunt Tammy said, "He never showed us the violent side of him. That's why it's so hard for us to understand this." She also stated, "I could never be angry at him, because I know he didn't mean what he did." His other aunt, Shauna, later said, "I feel that wasn't the Jeffrey I know. I never held it against him. People just look at me crazy because I defended him, and he killed my dad. We know how much Jeffrey loved my dad, and how much my dad loved Jeffrey." After the incident, those who knew him spoke about how Weise was treated in school. Many confirmed that he was bullied, but some denied knowing that that was the case. The principal of the school later stated that they weren't aware that Weise was teased a lot. He said, "I didn't really, I guess, feel that he was teased to the point where something like this would happen." Some that knew Weise later came forward and claimed that they heard him threaten to shoot up the school. In fact, it's reported that as many as 39 people were aware that an attack was being planned. It's impossible to know if they took the threats seriously, but seeing as there seemed to be no one that came forward about them prior to the incident, they probably thought they were empty threats. I sincerely wish someone would have said something, as it may have prevented the deaths of 9 innocent people. With that, let's move on to talking about the victims, as it's important to remember the people who had their lives ripped away from them that day. Darrell Allen Lucier Sr. was 58 years old at the time of his death and was born on September 3, 1946. He devoted decades of his life to serve and protect in the tribal police force on the reservation, and like stated before, was usually the first to show up to a call. He had a nickname, Dash, which all of his friends and family would refer to him as. Someone who had worked with him for years later stated, "I knew Dash well. I called him Grandpa. He was a great guy." 31-year-old Michelle Lee Sagana was born on November 10, 1973, and was the unfortunate second victim of this tragic shooting. Her and Darrell Sr. had been together for several years, and I read that they had a 13-year-old son, but some sources only list him as her son, so it's possible that Darrell Sr. wasn't his biological father. Michelle spent her entire life living in Red Lake. She had been a stay-at-home mother for a while, but in the year prior to her death, she ended up getting a job at a casino, which she loved. She enjoyed spending time with her family, but most especially her son. She reportedly was also invested in the Red Lake High School basketball team, even though she was well into adulthood. Derek Brian Brunn was 28 years old when he died, and was born on September 28, 1976. He attended Red Lake High School in his teens and graduated in 1994. He became a part of the local police department some years after graduating. According to his obituary, he was in this position for about 6 years before he left. He then got his position as an unarmed security guard at the very high school he had graduated from. He was training to become an emergency medical technician while working at the school. Despite not being a part of the police force anymore, or armed for that matter, Derek put his life on the line in an attempt to save others, which shows just what kind of a person he was. A few years prior to his death, his 4-year-old daughter, Courtney, unfortunately passed away, and his marriage subsequently fell apart. I hope he was doing better towards the end of his life. He was said to have been a gentle soul who loved to serve his community. Derek's cousin Nancy had a lot to say about him. He was just an all-around good guy. She also noted that he would help anyone out with whatever they needed, even opening his home to people who needed a place to stay, saying, "He was a kind and gentle person." Nancy also stated, "The only comfort that his family has is that he's with Courtney now." Derek's sister Kathy later stated, "I figured he wouldn't run, that he would try to stop this young kid, and I'm proud of him. But I'm also kind of mad that he didn't run too. He will be remembered for his bravery, kindness, and generosity." The only teacher killed in the shooting was 62-year-old Neva Jane Rogers, who was born on December 19, 1942. According to my sources, Neva was a strict but encouraging teacher, always striving to help her students in any way possible. I also read that in the winter months, Neva would bring extra pairs of gloves, as well as hats for the students that couldn't afford them. According to RedLakeNationNews.com, Neva had left her teaching job at the high school and was gone for several years. It was said that she had a strong connection to the community, which ultimately brought her back to the reservation to teach once again. She was looking forward to traveling the world when she retired that spring. All around, it sounds like she was an amazing person, someone who the community benefited from greatly. It's a shame that her life was cut short. The last 5 victims are in no particular order. Chase Albert Lucier was only 15 years old at the time of his death, being born on December 23, 1989. Many report that during the shooting, Chase was seen pushing other students to safety, and like stated previously, He shielded his friend Ashley from Weise's gunfire, effectively saving her life. Chase had become a teen dad in the few months prior to his death. Despite having a newborn son and doing his best to be a good dad, many recall that Chase still made a great effort to keep up with his friendships, sports, and schoolwork. According to family members, Chase took his academics very seriously. He was determined to prove that he could strive in school, while also providing for his young son. One of his friends later recalled that Chase absolutely loved his baby. According to those who knew him, Chase had a heart of gold. That assessment is clearly shown through his brave and selfless actions on March 21, 2005. He put his life on the line for his fellow classmates and lost it in return. 14-year-old Alicia Alberta White was born on May 26, 1990. Her best friend recalled Alicia as a bright soul who left an impression on anyone she met. This was just the case for Jeff May, the student who attempted to subdue Weise in the classroom. If you remember, Jeff May had a huge crush on her. As far as I read, Jeff May stayed single for at least 10 years after the shooting. He later said, quote, "The girl I wanted died in that room." Friends and family remember Alicia as a sweet and selfless girl. She was the oldest of 6 children, all of whom lived with their grandmother who was ill. Alicia acted as a mother figure to her younger siblings, stepping up to care for them. Despite being in a tough situation, Alicia always stayed cheerful and positive. The mother of one of Alicia's friends later stated, "She was really a sweet little girl. She never hurt anybody, and had no bad things to say about anything or anyone." Born on January 4, 1990, Thurleen Marie Stillday was 15 years old at the time of her death. I couldn't find too much information about her, unfortunately, but I did read that she was a very friendly and caring girl. She was known to be super creative and loved storytelling in particular. A fellow student described Thurleen as someone who had a lot of friends and someone who was happy all of the time. Those who knew her recalled that she was very excited about getting through high school and doing great things with her life. 15-year-old Chanel Starr Rosebear was born on August 18, 1989. Chanel was attending a Native American boarding school in Oklahoma not too long before the shooting. At the time, she was reportedly begging her family to come back home, which eventually happened. Chanel's mother said, "I feel like that was the biggest mistake I ever made. If I didn't let her come back, she probably would have still been with us." Chanel's family struggled immensely after her death. Her mother had a particularly hard time coping and rarely left the house following the shooting. It took almost a full year after the tragedy for Chanel's mother to finally begin to heal. Chanel had an infectious smile, one that would light the entire room up. She was tall, which gave her an advantage when playing basketball, which she enjoyed doing. Her teammates loved her, and she was known to motivate them to do their best. She was also reported to have been a cheerleader as well. Dwayne Michael Lewis Jr., born on January 3, 1990, was also 15 years old and was the last student killed that day. Dwayne loved to play basketball with friends at school, but also at the gym and throughout many neighborhoods surrounding his home. Dwayne was a very athletic and friendly person. A friend of Dwayne's mother said, quote, "He was just an outgoing kid. He would talk to anyone. He had a bunch of friends up here." A former teacher of Dwayne's described him as a very easygoing person, someone who rarely got into trouble, and who was nice to everyone. The Red Lake High School massacre is an unimaginable tragedy. Our hearts go out to all of the people affected by the shooting. Because of people like Derek Brunn, Leanne Grant, Chase Lucier, and Jeff May, countless lives were saved. Weise was ultimately slowed down, giving more people a chance to escape. The other teachers in the school also acted fast and saved multiple lives with their quick thinking. Please keep the victims and their families in your thoughts today. Thank you for joining us for another case. We hope you learned something new from the video if you have heard of the case before. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you aren't already, and please take a look at joining our membership if you're interested. We are eternally grateful for all of the support regardless. We want to extend a special thank you to our members for supporting the channel further. It really does make a difference. We will be back with another case as soon as we can. Thank you for everyone's patience. We hope everyone has a great day, and make sure to stay safe.